Hello, everyone. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So, just a show of hands, how many of here are game developers? Meron ba? And okay lang, kasi I'm aware that this is a Python conference. So, while I was preparing the presentation, I I tried to minimize the amount of game development related stuff because, this is a Python conference. But anyway, so this talk is about taming the engine, Python automation in Unreal. So, like mentioned previously, my name is Gabriel Enriquez. I am a XR developer, and that's my website, and that's my email. So, in a little bit about my background and history. Back in 2015, I started my career as a 3D artist, and so one of my passion was creating 3D environments using Blender, Maya, and 3ds Max. So these are some of the 3D models that I've made. So the concept art was originally made by another person, and I simply rendered them in the game engine and modeled in Blender and Maya and 3ds Max. And then throughout the years, I have participated in various events and workshops and conferences as a speaker. So I really want to contribute to the community and give back to my knowledge. Yeah. And then, as mentioned previously, I did make some media appearances in the past. This was all pre-pandemic because nowadays I'm mostly busy. Okay, anyway. So about my presentation. So I'll be talking about Python in Unreal Engine and a comparison between Python, C++, and blueprints, and practical use cases of Python in Unreal. So since most of you here are not game developers, then I'm assuming that most of you also don't know about Unreal Engine. So basically, Unreal is a game engine that was, I think, developed in 1998 and is still currently being developed and is now in its fifth iteration. You may not have used Unreal Engine, but you do know the games that were made in Unreal Engine. So some of these games are made in Unreal, and there are also other games that will be coming out that are going to be made in Unreal, like Witcher 4. I think that game will be made in Unreal. And in the games industry, it started out as a niche industry. You can form a studio with just a team of 10 or 20 people, but throughout the years, game development has exploded, right? I think its total revenue globally has now surpassed film and movies. And because of that, game engines have also been used in different industries other than just games. They have been used in 3D visualization, training simulation, automotive design, and film rendering. And since we now use game engines in different industries, there are also new requirements. They are being used in bigger projects, and more data and assets are being used, and of course, more complex pipelines. And that is where Python comes into play. We try to simplify and improve the workflow, since now most companies that do use Unreal Engine, they require complex pipelines, and some studios even have like 200 to 300 people, and all are dealing with gigabytes of amounts of data. That's what Python in Unreal tries to solve. So why Python? So as mentioned, Python is the language for production pipelines, and it's been used if you want to create files that can make it interoperable between different software. And most importantly, in Unreal Engine, it can automate time-consuming tasks. So I'll show some of that later. So Python is easy to implement. It does not have the same performance as C++, since C++ is the base language of Unreal Engine, and C++ is the language that you use if you want to make a game in Unreal. But that's okay, because in using Python in Unreal, you usually use it in tasks that does not require performance critical activities. And also, it's designed to work only in the editor and not during runtime. So runtime meaning when the game is running. You only use it before or during the creation of the application or the game. And yeah, it is meant to automate repetitive editor tasks. So when comparing Python and C++ and Blueprints in Unreal, so Blueprints is like the node editor, node-based programming in Unreal Engine. Anyway, so there might be viewers here or online in YouTube once the video has been posted that are wondering why should we have Python in Unreal when you already have C++ and Blueprints? And that is a good question that I've wondered that myself. But the advantage here is that although they do overlap, the amount of things that they can do overlap, and you can also argue that you can just use C++ because C++ can do everything in Unreal Engine. The beauty with Python is, like I mentioned, it's with the tasks that you use it for, mostly things that are inside the editor and not during runtime. It's easier and it's faster and it's easier to implement. So when exactly do we use Python versus C++ in Unreal? So in very repetitive tasks, so what kind of activities are these? Like importing and exporting assets, very large amount of assets, and when trying to edit large amounts of assets inside the editor. So those are types of activities that you can automate in Unreal. And what activities are now should be done in C++. So anything that involves performance critical tasks, those should be done in C++. And anything that needs to happen during runtime, like having a quest system. So you design the quest during the creation of the game inside the editor, and then the quest system also runs while the game is running, right? So that is something that needs to be designed in C++. So another example that needs to be made in C++ instead of in Python is an AI state machine. So if you have NPCs inside your game, so that is one thing that needs to be done, that runs during, that needs to be designed in editor and runs during runtime. So that's preferably done in C++, and that's not something that is done in Python. And like I mentioned previously, Python, when used correctly, is able to simplify some of the tasks that are sometimes complicated in C++. So this is the only slide that I placed code. Anyway, so here's an example of code that tries to print assets that you have selected inside the Unreal Engine editor. So in Python, you can see that you only need like 5 lines of code. But if you try to do that same thing in C++ in Unreal, it's there's a lot of lines there involved. So yeah, there are use cases, and there are plenty of other use cases other than just printing the number of assets that have been selected. And we're going to check out those practical use cases. Okay, so one example here is one thing that I've done in the past. I've worked in a project that involves a lot of geospatial data. So what we did before was we were trying to create 3D renders, 3D interactive applications of cities around the world. So things like cities in the US and cities in Paris, sorry, in France, and also in, what was that? In Saudi Arabia, I believe. And when dealing with geospatial data, those are large amounts of gigabytes, and each city involves around 100 to 200, or maybe even more amount of files that may even reach terabytes of data. And if you've worked in game engines, if you start importing large amounts of data with that amount of size, it's the game engine will either freeze or it will crash. So what I did, because before I did not know how to use Python, I manually imported the assets one by one, or maybe 10 by 10 assets per import, until I was able to import everything. But if you're dealing with thousands of assets, then it's one task that you can automate in just a few of lines in Python. So you can, let's say, import just one asset at a time, and then maybe leave your computer and then wait for a couple of hours until everything has been imported. So that's one thing that you can automate. Okay, another is bulk editing properties. So this is another problem that I've encountered, where an example is, let's say that you've been hired to work on a project that already has a lot of assets inside. Maybe, let's say, 1,000 number of geospatial data. And suddenly you realize you need to edit some of the files, or not just some, but all of the files, maybe because there was some kind of error during the import, or maybe there's some kind of error with the material or something like that. And this can easily be done in Unreal because there is a setting where you can just select all of the assets and then right-click, and then there's something called bulk matrix edit. But that only works if the assets are simple and not that big. But if you're dealing with large amounts of assets like what I've mentioned, geospatial data, or assets related to architectural visualization, you've got tons of assets that you need to edit. And if you try right-clicking while selecting all the assets, the engine will try to load into memory all of those assets, and your editor would either crash or it will freeze. So this is one other application that you can use Python, where you can just prepare a script that can edit one file at a time, and then save it, and then go to the other file and then resave it. I wish I knew this earlier. All right. Next is material instances. So there may be some people here who have worked in architectural visualization, like in 3ds Max or in Maya, and it involves a lot of materials where sometimes each asset inside the 3D model has its own material, and sometimes it involves thousands of materials. And there are projects where people or clients want to import these 3D models inside Unreal Engine. And what happens is that the material becomes a base material instead of a material instance. And this is something that can be fixed manually, but if you have thousands of materials, then this is also another application, another case where you can use Python to automate the process and edit the material and convert, and perhaps generate a material instance and then assign each material instance to each mesh, and then also assign the corresponding textures to each material instance. Okay, another case is proxy geometries. So in games, when you have a lot of meshes that are far away from the user's camera, what developers use to optimize the game is they combine those meshes and then simplify them so that it reduces the number of performance impact on the GPU and on the CPU. But if you have a large environment like an open world game or something like that, it becomes very tedious to select each mesh and try to group them one by one and then combine them. So this is another use case where you can use Python to check based on certain attributes which meshes to combine, and then apply those combination, and also convert those textures into one texture instead of multiple textures. Okay, so sometimes there are actors inside the application that are duplicated. So this might be done by a coworker. This has happened to me multiple times where, some assets have been duplicated and we don't know why, let's say, the performance is being impacted, but it turns out that there was some kind of very large light source that was in the middle of the game world. So that is something that you can also use Python to, say, check which actors inside the level have the same position inside the world, and check if they are the same type, are they the same mesh, or are they the same lighting, and then delete the corresponding actors. Okay, next is texture atlases. So a texture atlas is where you combine multiple textures into one texture, and this is to optimize the number of materials inside a static mesh. So you can use Python to, say, get a number of selected textures and then combine them into a single texture much more easily, rather than exporting those textures to Photoshop, combining them manually, and then re-importing them into Unreal Engine. Okay, so IK rigs. This one I have not explored myself, but I've seen people who have used Python to automate some of the processes when dealing with IK. And this is something that is tedious at times because if you have several characters and you need to share animation between characters inside the application, then yeah, this is where you can automate some of the processes using Python. Another case is in the sequencer. So sometimes you may want to automatically generate level sequences based on a certain criteria. Let's say you want to create dynamic cutscenes based on how the user is moving the camera inside the editor. So this is another example of where you can use Python. Okay, now this one is something that I've used myself, and it's very helpful. So oftentimes in 3D models, when we import them to a game engine, you need to optimize them. And this happens especially with architectural visualization because the client gives you 3D models and they are extremely detailed, like millions of triangles and polygons. And you need to one by one optimize them by clicking on each one and then right click and then create a level of detail. And it can be tedious. So you can also use Python here to generate a level of details for each asset in the entirety of your project. Okay, another example is in collision meshes. So by default, when you import meshes, sometimes they don't have collision, or sometimes they have complex collision and very unoptimized collision. So you can use Python to generate convex collision for each mesh, depending on the number, which follow a certain number of halls and number of I forgot the term, but basically, depending on what type of mesh that you have, you can use Python to simplify the complexity of the collision mesh that you will generate. So now this one I haven't fully explored yet as well, and I think this is a new feature in Unreal Engine. But we want to automate the tedious process of creating rigs for our characters. So this is something that you can also use Python to automate. Okay, so what is the conclusion here? So I want you guys to understand that there are tasks that are tedious and repetitive in game development, but you can automate all those stuff using Python. And although it might take a while to create a script to automate these processes, I think the output and the benefit that you will get is far outweigh the amount of work that you need to create the scripts. So Python is best used for projects that deal with large amounts of data and repetitive processes. And like I mentioned previously, it's only used inside the editor and not during runtime. So if it's something that needs to happen during runtime, that's when you use either blueprints or C++. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation. I hope that you now have an idea of how you can use Python to make your life easier when using. And I think Python may also be used not just in Unreal, but maybe perhaps in Unity and other game engines. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I'm not going to use the mic. I guess everyone can hear me at the back. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to fall in line with the mic and ask your question. Yeah, I didn't even need to use my battle cards. You're so on time. Modulated lang kasi boses.
Hello po. So I'm Jerry, and before I have used Unreal Engines, but not necessarily in a professional way. I have worked with a tiny team of just 3 to 4 people. And we had a game designer who does environmental design as well. So I can relate with the concerns that you have in the
Yeah, I worked as a 3D artist for 4 years. So
yeah.
Yeah,
And
I'm
then
passionate about that.
Before you explain, I'm not asking a question technically, but I'm just trying to comment here because I realized that before we had to, me and some of my friends had to make a plugin for Unreal Engine to automate these, and there's a lot of boilerplate codes in the background, and you had to set up. Sometimes when you compile and the hot reloading does not work,
Yeah.
and then you had to restart the entire engine, which is very tedious when the project gets big.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have a question. So, can you use Python to create UI elements in editor? Because we previously we had some projects that we had to do that, so that creating like buttons to that click and runs some scripts in the editor and creates some visualization of the data in the game.
That's something that I haven't explored, but I've seen some experiments where they've used. I think it's going to be a combination of both Python and blueprints, widget blueprints, and perhaps even C++. I have not yet explored that, but I have seen people experimenting with it. So,
Okay.
yeah, I think you can.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, I'm Sonny Valdez. Question on the editor. So the Python code will then only be used in the editor. How much control do we have on the Python itself? What I mean is the Python version number stuck, or can we upgrade, add other libraries, or if that makes sense?
I forgot what was mentioned in the documentation, but if I recall, so there's a plugin that you enable inside the Unreal Engine editor, and I think you can control it inside the Python editor that you're using, the IDE that you're using.
Okay, so just for context, I was thinking of making a web server inside the editor, so I could send some data there, and then that would do the controlling. Thank you.
Cool, cool.
Hello, I'm Kevin from Ateneo de Naga. I just have a question. If have you explored other applications of Python in game development aside from just automation?
No, only here.
Okay. So, do you think is it possible to have other applications aside from automation? Because I think we know that. I think Python also has a capability, like for example, rendering probably to the objects like via the framework Pygame, something like that. I know Unreal is made for like 3D something. So, do you think you can? There's a possible link for a combination of not just the automation but also game development with Python and Unreal.
I haven't fully explored that aspect, but I think there's a presentation later this afternoon about Python and about creating a game in Python. So perhaps the speaker in that presentation might be able to answer your question much more clearly than mine.
All right, thank you, sir.
Yes. Also, for additional information, the talk that you might be interested in is about creating a typing game. It's an NGF building by Aaron Cho. I'll be the host there, so I know. I was planning the speaker split. So, does anyone have any other questions? Okay, going once, going twice. I'll have to ask my question first before we end. Sorry. So, I would like to ask. Do we need, outside of what you said, editor, do we need specific runtimes to use Python in Unity? Like, do we need to install a virtual environment or anything in that particular aspect?
In Unity, I'm not sure, but in Unreal, yeah, you do need to install Python and an IDE like PyCharm.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? Going once? Going twice? Sold. No, just kidding. A round of applause for our speaker, the Gap.